Hey, everybody, welcome. It's Resistance Live for the 19th of September, 2019, from my tiny little hotel room in New York City. Hello, everybody. Thanks for your patience yesterday. I'm, as you all know, like on the road this week, and things have been a little wonky and wild and fun and good and interesting. But sorry about the scenery. The background's a little funky. In any event, we have like a mountain of stuff to talk about. I want to give everybody a few minutes to log in here. So I will just remind you all that there will not be a broadcast tomorrow because I am going to be working and then on a plane for most of the day. But I will endeavor to fill you all in on Monday on anything that happens in what is already like a very wild and weird week. We have a bunch of stuff to talk about. I'm going to start with Lewandowski because that news is now from from Tuesday. But I want y'all to understand that the state of affairs with Lewandowski is, in my opinion, emblematic of what we have seen from this administration with regard to the authority of Congress. He's simply like the living embodiment of the refusal to consent to oversight of what the administration is doing. His level of disrespect, his willingness to lie to Congress, the inability of the Democrats to kind of make a dent on him until they got to Barry Burke is very distressing. It's not something that anyone would have gotten away with in any other administration. And frankly, one of the things that I found really difficult to take in all of this is the fact that he was not actually held in contempt in that hearing, because he should have been. And Nancy Pelosi has since said, oh, well, perhaps he'll be held in contempt down the road, or I think he should have been held in contempt, and he's not been held in contempt, even though Nancy could do that in a heartbeat. So it's very strange, and I'll just add that also very. I know a lot of you felt this way because I heard from a lot of you on Tuesday while he was live. It felt very offensive in a lot of ways, and those of us who are lawyers or who have worked in Washington D.C. or who have had interactions with Congress, just the sheer level of disrespect and obstreperousness, like an unwillingness to participate in the process, was really too much to take in a lot of ways. So in any event, my thought here from what we can expect going forward is that Lewandowski may still be held in contempt of Congress. What I don't understand, which is what I always don't understand, is why Nancy Pelosi hasn't done that yet. And honestly, why Jerry Nadler didn't do it in the hearing, because David Cicilline actually asked for Lewandowski to be held in contempt in the middle of that hearing, and Nadler didn't do it, which also it just doesn't make any sense. When you have a witness who's behaving that way on the stand, not only do you cross-examine them in the way that Barry Burke did, and you do that right away, but you ask for them to be treated as a hostile witness. And if they refuse to answer questions, you move to have them held in contempt of court. That is what should have happened here. And so the fact that it didn't, yet again, is just a sign that the Democrats don't really understand what they're up against. Because the other thing to remember here is that now that Lewandowski has gotten away with this, at least to some extent, and the president apparently praised his opening statement, we're going to see more of this from witnesses from the administration that are called in front of Congress. If it works one time, they're going to do it again. It's exactly what happened, by the way, with the willingness to defy subpoenas. So, this is the other thing to remember is, that they do what every good predatory organization and predator period does, which is that they cross a line and they wait to see if there's any consequences. And if there's not any consequences, then they do it again, or they do more. So the Lewandowski situation does trouble me. And, I hope there will be, because, I've been saying this for months. You guys know this. I'm preaching to the choir. But, you arrest a witness for failing to comply with the subpoena or for failing to truthfully testify before Congress. That's the last time that's going to happen. And they should have done it 6 months ago. So, like when Don McGahn refused to testify. So, once again, we are where we are. All right. Netanyahu lost the election but is refusing to concede. I am only going to mention that from the standpoint of saying this. I agree with the other commentators who have very clearly stated that we have until November of next year to figure out how we're going to deal with that. My expectation, by the way, is that we are going to see exactly the same unwillingness to concede from this president in the event that he opts to not step away from the office if he loses the election. And we, as an American people, and particularly the Democratic Party, needs to be thinking about what they're going to do legally, from the standpoint of the Secret Service, from the standpoint of the National Guard, I don't know if he doesn't leave office. So it raises the prospect of exactly the same sorts of statements as what Netanyahu said, which was basically like, I'm not going to concede because the fake news influenced the election. It's a little bit of a preview. Now, Trump has subsequently disavowed Bibi, which is not surprising because, he only has loyalty as long as people can do something for him. But this again is just a warning sign. It's a big red flag of what we have to be prepared for here. Okay. Iran. So there was a really curious bit of breaking news yesterday. I wonder, I hope you all kind of caught it in relation to what's happening between the Saudis and Iran with this potential bombing of this oil plant, Okay, so anyway, everybody knows what's going on there, right? Pompeo is necessarily pushing it toward war. He's saying that what Iran did is an act of war. That language in and of itself is particularly troubling. But yesterday there was this weird bit of breaking news out of the Japanese intelligence services, which basically said that Japan has no intelligence to indicate that Iran is responsible for this particular act. That's troubling. I mean, and again, we've been talking for the last couple of days at least about how that we're kind of in wag the dog territory here. It's very hard to trust anything that comes out of this administration from the standpoint of what's going on with Iran and what's going on with Saudi Arabia. Then you add to it that if we are taking action on behalf of Saudi Arabia here from a military standpoint, one of the things that is going to mean is that we're taking action on behalf of a kingdom that murdered an American journalist, an American permanent resident journalist for the Washington Post, which still, by the way, there haven't been any sanctions for or anything like that. So there's layers here of oddness. It also, of course, raises the prospect of, yet again, by the way, I should mention, of how much the Saudis are in bed with Trump and his son-in-law from the standpoint of their real estate holdings and everything else. I will just say this. This is not a scenario from a legal standpoint where the U.S. is kind of, quote unquote, obligated to do anything. We did have a few of you ask questions earlier this week about this issue of a declaration of war, which technically lies within the purview of Congress. But as we all know, every president going back ages now has engaged in military strikes without a declaration of war. So, it's not necessarily going to be a scenario in the event that Trump decides he wants this. Where there's going to be some formal declaration of war by the Congress or an attempt to seek it. In fact, given that Trump is who he is, he's probably just going to go off half-cocked without any approval from anybody. And that's very dangerous because, by the way, it implicates war with a potential nuclear power. So in other words, I mean, this is something to obviously keep an eye on. But as I said earlier in the week, I also don't want anybody to panic. What it looks like to me right now is that there's a lot of trial balloons being floated, which, as we've talked about on this broadcast many, many times before, is the standpoint that this administration, the experiment that this administration takes whenever they're trying to see what the public response is going to be to something that's particularly dangerous or troubling. So there's not really anything, there's no impending breaking news about it right now. What I will say is that it's not going to sit well with the international community in the event that the U.S. actually takes action here. And it's profoundly dangerous. So again, something to watch. All right, now we got to talk about the really big breaking news in the last 24 hours, which I wanted to save until we were a little bit of the ways into the broadcast, which is related to this whistleblower complaint out of national intelligence. So let's just back up to what we knew before 9:00 p.m. ET last night. So before 9 o'clock, it was actually 8:56 because I was on the computer waiting for Rachel Maddow when this news broke. What we knew prior to last night, was that there had been a whistleblower complaint out of the intelligence community that somehow related to the executive branch. And this is the whistleblower complaint that Adam Schiff, as the head of the House Intelligence Committee, had flagged as something that they had not been given access to in the letter that he sent last week, which was when this whole thing started to break. Well, there had been a lot of suspicion about who was implicated, how high up it went, that it had to be somebody senior in the executive branch. Last night we learned from the Washington Post that the whistleblower complaint relates to a promise that was made by the president to a foreign leader sometime in the weeks preceding August 12th when the complaint was filed. And that it is so serious that the Inspector General, who I will just say is a Trump appointee, felt that it needed to go to Congress after receiving the formal report. That effort was blocked illegally, I might add, by the acting director of national intelligence. Now, the law. Now, those of you who watched Lawrence O'Donnell last night got a very big briefing of this at the time that there was a handover from Rachel Maddow, because they actually went through the entire law, the regulations of when the Inspector General is allowed to go around the DNI to Congress in an event where there is a very serious whistleblower complaint out of the intelligence community. Lo and behold, we're in it. And in fact, the person who's complaining is now in a position where legally they are allowed to go around the acting DNI and take this to the intelligence committees, in fact, to the Gang of Eight. This is extremely troubling. Now, there are two things that we don't know yet. And there's a lot of speculation going around this morning on Twitter and elsewhere, and with all the pundits and the commentators and everything else about what this could be. The two things we don't know yet are who the president spoke to, which foreign leader, and what the promise was that was made. So let me just say this, though, and then we'll do a little speculation. You all know I don't like to speculate on the broadcast, but we'll do a little bit of it anyway. The one thing that we can say about this is that whatever it is that was said, and to whom it was said by the president, is such a grave threat to national security that the acting director of national intelligence and the attorney general are seeking to prevent the intelligence committees from finding out about it, because they know, and this is the conclusion that is obvious from this, they know that if this comes into the public domain, it's going to be a very, very grave problem for this president. So let's just think about the things that it could be. There's a few people who come to mind as to who he could have been speaking to. The top three in most worldviews is Putin, of course, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS from Saudi Arabia, and Kim Jong-un. Those are the three from North Korea. Those are the three most prominent speculation targets for this particular bit of news. We do know, given that we know that it was a phone call, we know from the readouts from the White House that there was a phone call with Vladimir Putin, between Vladimir Putin and the president on the 31st of July. That is obviously going to be one of the primary targets for a discussion about what might have taken place. However, there's also indications that he had phone conversations with other foreign leaders. So the big question here is who, as I said, and then what? Now, when it comes to Putin, there's a couple of things it could relate to. It could relate to this spy that was exculpated or extracted, as they like to say in the intelligence community, from Russia as a result of that meeting in 2017 in the Oval Office that we've talked about. I will tell you that that one is not my first choice, partially because one of the things that is of concern about that is that we're 2 years on from it. And it doesn't really make sense unless there's another tit for tat going on there, that now would be the time that the president would promise to turn over intelligence about that particular individual to the Russians or to Putin himself. There's also some theories about this having to do with Ukraine, the response generally out of NATO and what was the G8 until Russia was booted out of it. And the nature of policy there, that's one suspicion. There's also some suspicions here that, it may relate to a conversation with MBS about exactly what we were just talking about, this particular issue of the Saudi Arabian oil facility being bombed, allegedly by the Iranians. It could be he made a promise on that front. And, with Kim Jong-un, who knows, right? They're madly in love with each other. So there's also speculation there as to something having been promised there without justification. Regardless, the overarching tenor of this right now, and the thing that we all need to be aware of, is that this is so grave that Trump's own appointed inspector general said it needed to be taken to Congress, and the acting DNI is blocking it. Both of those things tell us everything we need to know about the gravity of where we are. And I'll just add, I know there's a lot of you out there who are bitter and cynical about where we find ourselves right now, and I understand that. I still think, and I've been saying this from the very first broadcast we did here back in January of 2017, I still think there's a line in the sand that, if crossed, will break the GOP with regard to this president. Promising to engage in nuclear warfare on behalf of Saudi Arabia might cut it. So, the real key issue here is that, we need to kind of keep an eye on this, because I will tell you that it is one of those kind of alarm bell moments in American history right now that they're going to write about in the history books. And we do not yet know the full context of what it's about. Okay, so last things on this. There's going to be 2 hearings related to this particular complaint. One of them is behind closed doors with the Intelligence Committee, the Intelligence Committee of the House today. The next one is an open hearing next Thursday with the acting DNI. So we're going to learn a lot more about this. My expectation is within the next 24 hours, because apart from anything else, the other thing to remember here is that there are people who are leaking information now to the Washington Post because of how serious these allegations are, and because of how the acting DNI is blocking all of this. And that, by the way, this is the other thing I just want to remind you all. Whistleblowers put their jobs on the line, their careers on the line when they make a complaint like this. The folks who are leaking information to the Washington Post are putting it all on the line, their entire professional trajectory, their jobs, their security clearance, by talking to the Washington Post. That's how serious this is. And so, the other thing I just want to say this morning from this tiny little hotel room is this. It's a good moment to sort of set aside your cynicism and bitterness right now, just simply because of the context of this particular bit of breaking news. There is going to be a breaking point. And I will just add, I do not know how. It's happened before, right? But I'm just going to say, I do not know how the GOP will be able to justify, for instance, the sale of American intelligence and the revealing of for instance, in our hypotheticals that we've talked about this morning, for instance, the revealing of the identity of a spy that's been embedded in Russia to the Russians. There's no way to justify that. There's like literally no way to justify something like that. And so, again, we will have to see what the developing news is on this, but this is as serious as it gets. And the news that we learned last night, from the standpoint of the fact that it's the president, it's not somebody high up in the administration, which we didn't know. It's not something, it's not someone, it's not Stephen Miller, it's not Ivanka, it's the president of the United States having made a promise on the phone to a foreign leader that so seriously implicates the national security of the United States of America that a whistleblower put their job on the line. The Inspector General wanted to take it to Congress, and the acting DNI is trying to shut it up to protect the president. We're well into the realm now of we're so far beyond Nixon. We've been so far beyond Nixon for quite some time, but we're well beyond the point of reason right now, of what will likely be reasonably justified. So I guess that's the silver lining, right? Is that we may have finally hit a point here, depending on how the story breaks, where there's not going to be any option but to impeach the president, and to do it now. All right, so that's it for today, my friends. I want to say thank you again to all of you with your patience yesterday. Again, I'm working this week. There will not be a broadcast tomorrow. Please rest assured that come Monday, when I'm back at home base, there will be a broadcast that covers all the news since. I'm tweeting when I can while I'm here on the East Coast working, and I'm going to be on another plane today for a period of time, and then on a plane tomorrow again. But you can rest assured that I will be doing updates on Twitter. You can follow me there. I'll also, just for those of you who are interested in what I'm doing on the road, my Instagram account has suddenly become very active again, in part because we've had some great experiences on this trip so far, and some wonderful photographs taken. So if you want to check that out, you can head over to Instagram too and check it out. But I'll be updating all of you with political news as often as I can. And I want to thank you all, of course, as always, for your complete patience with all of this and, my day job. All right. Much love to all of you. I will talk to all of you on Monday. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter for all the bits of breaking news. All right. Much love. Bye.